Carlos Santana has finally revealed a truth he kept hidden for most of his life, a truth that people in Hollywood, the music industry, and even those closest to him never fully understood. It wasn't about the drugs, the affairs, or the wild lifestyle that became part of his public image. Instead, it was something far darker, something that happened long before he was famous, long before Woodstock, long before he became a spiritual figure in the world of music. This secret was buried inside him since childhood, and only now, as he faces his later years and looks back at everything he survived, he's finally ready to talk about it. What he revealed explains the pain that shaped him, the moments when he wanted to end his own life, and the years he spent searching for peace, love, and redemption. His story suddenly looks very different once you understand what he went through. He was born on July 20, 1947, in the small, dusty village of Otland de Navarro in Jalisco, Mexico. His family lived with constant struggle. His father, Jose, was a hard-working mariachi violinist who once played with symphony groups but later performed with his mariachi band around Tijuana and Southern California. His mother, Josefina, worked tirelessly to hold the family together even though they were often poor and unsure how they would make it through each month. The house was crowded with at least 6 children. There was very little privacy, very little money, and barely enough food. When the family moved to Tijuana, the situation didn't improve much. Jose continued performing to earn whatever he could, but the income was unstable. The pressure in the home was heavy, and that weight fell onto Carlos even when he was still a child. At just 5 years old, his father handed him a violin and insisted he learn to play. To Jose, music wasn't simply a dream or a hobby. It was a way to survive. He believed if his children learned music, they would always have a way to make a living. Carlos tried, but something about the violin felt wrong to him. The sound didn't connect with his heart. It felt like he was being shaped into his father's vision rather than discovering his own. While he played the traditional songs with the precision his father demanded, he was quietly drawn to something completely different. Late at night, he would tune into American radio stations drifting across the border. The first time he heard the electric blues, something inside him lit up. He heard musicians whose sounds were full of soul and fire, artists like B.B. King, T-Bone Walker, and Little Richard. These weren't careful, traditional performances. They were powerful, emotional, and full of life. At 8 years old, he picked up a guitar, and everything shifted. It wasn't just that the instrument felt more natural. It was that the guitar allowed him to express himself in a way the violin never could. He continued playing both styles to keep peace at home, carrying the weight of tradition while dreaming of something freer and wilder. But those dreams couldn't protect him from everything. Between the ages of 10 and 12, a man from the other side of the border began abusing him. The man seemed friendly at first. He brought gifts, toys, and smiles that made a young child feel special. But behind those gestures was a darker intention. The man used his kindness to trap Carlos in silence. Carlos didn't know how to understand what was happening to him. He felt confused, ashamed, and guilty, even though he was only a child. When his parents found out, they tried to downplay the situation. They didn't know how to deal with it, and in their fear and confusion, they avoided talking about it. But the damage was already done. Carlos buried the truth deep inside himself, carrying the pain quietly because he had no safe place to put it. Years later in interviews, he admitted that the experience stayed with him for decades. It shaped his emotions, his self-esteem, his relationships, and even his music. He said that eventually, forgiveness helped him rise out of the darkest part of that memory, but reaching that point took a very long time. In 1955, when he was 8, the family moved fully to Tijuana. The city was noisy, crowded, colorful, and full of danger. For a child, it was overwhelming. His father performed at fiestas, and Carlos played the violin beside him. But as he grew older, the battle between tradition and freedom kept building. While his father pushed him to stay loyal to mariachi music, Carlos felt the pull of blues and rock growing stronger every day. By the time he reached his early teens, the conflict reached a breaking point. At 12, he became a roadie for Javier Batiz, a guitarist who had a big influence on him. Soon, Carlos joined his band, the TJs. Because Batez already played lead guitar, Carlos switched to bass, but he didn't mind. He was simply happy to be immersed in the world of music he loved. He soaked up every sound he heard: Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, Howlin' Wolf, James Brown. He was learning without realizing how fast he was growing as a musician. Meanwhile, life at home wasn't getting easier. In 1961, when he was 14, his father left for San Francisco to find stable work in a factory. That sudden separation broke something inside Carlos. With his father gone, he became one of the main people responsible for helping support the family. He played guitar on street corners for spare coins. He collected scrap metal and car parts to sell. Sometimes he had to steal to survive. Eventually, he was arrested for petty theft. He wasn't a criminal, he was a desperate teenager trying to help keep his family fed. That same year, he worked washing dishes and saving money to buy a proper guitar. He managed to save $300, but one day he came home to find out his mother had taken the money. She spent it on dental work for his sister and overdue rent. She handed Carlos only $20 back. He felt betrayed, angry, and hopeless. So he left. He returned to Tijuana alone and started playing in dirty strip clubs where the pay was almost nothing. He survived off tips, played for drunk crowds who didn't care who he was, and slept wherever he could. He was just a teenager living in a world full of danger, prostitution, violence, and gangs. One night he even continued playing while a shooting broke out. Yet through all the chaos, his music became sharper. His determination grew stronger. A year later, his family returned for him. They didn't ask. They forced him into a car and drove him back north. They said they couldn't leave him in a place that would destroy him. When he turned 15, he dropped out of school and went back to playing in clubs, this time willingly. The music had already claimed him. He played nightly sets for just a few dollars, but people were starting to notice that he had a rare talent, something raw and powerful. What no one knew was that behind his growing skill was a lifetime of hardship, poverty, family conflict, heartbreak, shame, and trauma he kept buried deep. All of it shaped the musician he would become. The world would later see him as a legend, a spiritual force, a man who spoke through music. But the person behind the spotlight had a story full of wounds he rarely spoke about. And now, after 50 years of silence, he's finally revealing what he carried all along, the truth that explains his struggle, his pain, and his lifelong search for healing. Carlos Santana kept playing in rough clubs where the floors were sticky, the lights were dim, and the air always smelled like smoke and sweat. His guitar became more than an instrument. It became a shield, a voice, a place where he could release everything he carried without saying a word. Every night he played, he learned how to turn fear into rhythm and loneliness into sound. Even though his father felt ashamed at first that Carlos was performing in places filled with prostitution, alcohol, and violence, he eventually accepted that it was the only way Carlos could earn money and help the family survive. The pressure on the young musician was heavy, but music kept him standing. One night after a long club show, exhausted and hungry, Carlos went out into a back alley. There, someone handed him marijuana for the first time. He was 16, still trying to understand the world, and the drug gave him a moment of escape from everything weighing on his shoulders. That moment opened a door into the underground culture he lived in, a place where drugs were everywhere and survival meant adapting. Years later, when he formed his band, the managers would sometimes leave a huge joint on the table during lunch just to see if he would take it. He smoked it, and the rush hit him like a spinning kaleidoscope. Colors, sounds, and ideas swirled in his mind. He once tried to ban his bandmates from getting high during rehearsals because they kept forgetting songs, but even he couldn't deny how the drugs changed his perception of music. Instead of hearing simple notes, he began feeling them as colors and energy, like the sounds were alive and moving. When he first came to San Francisco in 1963 to join his family again, he didn't like it at all. The cold weather, the unfamiliar streets, and the strange culture made him miss Tijuana's madness, noise, and heat. He went back, then returned again, pulled by something he couldn't explain. It was like the universe was dragging him toward a future he couldn't see yet. By 1965, he finally settled in San Francisco for good. He was 18 and broke. He washed dishes at the TikTok drive-in restaurant for a little money, sometimes sleeping there when he had nowhere else to go. When he wasn't working, he jammed on the street, playing for spare change, trying to get anyone's attention. He played in tiny bars, parks, and basements. He once said San Francisco felt like a musical treasure chest because blues, jazz, Latin music, and rock all collided in one place. That same year he officially became a United States citizen. Even though he was trying to build a life in America, he kept sneaking back into Tijuana to watch American bands perform. Every trip fed his imagination and shaped his style. He absorbed every sound he heard, mixing the roughness of Tijuana with the wild experimentation of the Bay Area. In 1966, he formed the Santana Blues Band with David Brown and Greg Rowley. They played in tiny, smoky clubs like El Convoy, often performing just for food, drinks, or small tips. The band constantly argued, broke up, reformed, and reshaped itself. Musicians came and went, but something magical kept forming around Carlos's unique fusion of Latin percussion and blues guitar. Audiences didn't know what to make of it yet, but the energy was raw and exciting. In 1967, everything shifted again. Carlos took LSD for the first time and felt like the guitar was talking back to him. He said it wasn't just a drug experience but a spiritual awakening. His mind opened, and suddenly, he wanted to mix everything he loved, salsa rhythms, African drums, blues bending, jazz improvisation, and rock power, into a sound no one had ever heard before. That same year, a major turning point arrived when promoter Bill Graham saw them play. Graham instantly recognized the band's power. He booked them to play at his legendary venue, the Fillmore West, and he shortened their name to simply Santana. Carlos was nervous about performing for big crowds. His trauma followed him everywhere, whispering fear in his ear, but Graham pushed him to trust his music. Slowly, Carlos learned to let the sound carry him instead of letting fear control him. The Fillmore shows helped them build a huge following, and by 1969, the band landed a deal with Columbia Records. But Carlos was struggling again. This time it was heroin. He missed recording sessions, arrived late, or didn't show up at all. The label almost dropped them. Some concerts happened without him, and he began drifting in and out of focus depending on the drugs. Even so, he found a way to get back on track long enough to record the debut album. Their first album came out in August 1969, just weeks after their life-changing performance at the Woodstock Festival. It sold more than 4 million copies, and the hit song Evil Ways became their breakout success. But the moment that turned Santana into legends happened before the album even dropped. On August 16, 1969, Carlos Santana walked barefoot onto the muddy Woodstock stage. The band wasn't famous. The crowd of nearly 400,000 people had no idea who they were. The only reason Santana even had a spot at the show was because Bill Graham fought for them. But hours before their performance, Carlos had taken a heavy dose of mescaline, thinking he had plenty of time before going on stage. Then plans changed, and suddenly someone told them they had to play at 2 p.m. The drug hit him like a wave. His arms felt strange, the sky looked like it was bending, and when he looked down, his guitar neck seemed to twist like a snake. Panic crawled up his spine, but there was no way out. The crowd was waiting. He stepped up to the mic, closed his eyes, and trusted his fingers. What followed was a wild, electric 45-minute performance. The band ripped through song after song, building toward the explosive track Soul Sacrifice. Carlos played with a mix of fear and freedom, trying to hold the guitar steady while the world around him seemed to melt. Michael Shreve, the band's 20-year-old drummer, unleashed a 7-minute solo that sent the audience into chaos. The crowd roared, and by the end, Santana had delivered one of the most iconic performances in music history. When the band walked off stage, nobody knew that they had just changed their entire future. But the moment Carlos reached the back, the drug overtook him. He collapsed, shaking and vomiting, overwhelmed by the dark turn of the trip. He told himself he would never perform high again, but the truth was more complicated. Over the next few years, drugs slipped in and out of his life like shadows. The world now knew his name, but inside, he was still fighting the same battles. When Columbia Records released their debut album only 2 weeks after Woodstock, it skyrocketed to number 4 on the Billboard charts. Evil Ways climbed to number 9 on the Hot 100, and more than 1 million copies sold almost immediately. Santana had officially arrived. Then came Abraxas on September 23, 1970. That album didn't just succeed, it exploded. It stayed on the Billboard 200 chart for 88 weeks, including 6 weeks at number 1. More than 5 million copies were sold in the United States alone. Songs like Black Magic Woman, Oi Como Va, and Chirapy, Chirapy, also called Mother's Daughter in earlier forms, spread around the world, creating a new kind of sound that mixed Latin rhythm, African percussion, blues guitar, jazz organ, and rock energy. It wasn't just music. It was a cultural earthquake. Santana's fame grew fast, but behind the scenes, Carlos still carried the weight of trauma, insecurity, and spiritual longing. The pressure of success, the chaos of drugs, and the confusion of fame all collided inside him. His music soared, but his heart often felt lost. Yet every time he stepped on stage, he returned to the one place where he always felt free, standing under hot lights, guitar in hand, letting sounds pour out of him like a story he couldn't speak any other way. And even as the world celebrated him, Carlos Santana was still searching for something deeper, something that would make sense of his past, his pain, and the path he was walking. Every note he played came from that search, and the music became the bridge between the boy who suffered quietly and the man who learned to fight his darkness with sound. Mike Tyson was once seen as one of the strongest and most unstoppable fighters in the world, but life broke him down in ways few people truly understand. When he was sent to prison, many people on the outside had no idea what he was going through, but inside those walls, his world slowly collapsed. Every mistake, every fight, every emotional wound built up until he wasn't the same person anymore. That change only became clear when he found himself behind bars for the second time, and this time, the world watched as everything fell apart again. His latest outburst didn't come from a place of strength, it came from years of pain, frustration, and a lifetime of trying to control a rage he never learned to tame. The second time Tyson ended up in prison, he was already older, more tired, and worn down by decades of chaos. His health wasn't the same, his mind wasn't the same, and people around him noticed he had become more unpredictable than ever. He wasn't the young fighter who could punch his way through problems anymore. He was a man who carried the weight of his past everywhere he went, even when he tried to hide it behind jokes and interviews. But that weight eventually exploded in a moment that shocked everyone. It started with a small argument after an event, something that should have ended in a few minutes, but Tyson wasn't in the right state of mind. He felt attacked, disrespected, and pushed into a corner, and when he felt cornered, he snapped. Cameras caught everything, the anger, the shouting, the sudden violence. Within hours, police had him in custody, and the world was once again talking about the fall of one of the most famous fighters in history. Tyson looked defeated as officers walked him into the station. His eyes weren't full of rage, they were full of exhaustion, like a man who was tired of fighting battles he never learned how to win. When he returned to prison, it was nothing like before. This time, he wasn't feared, he was pitied. He wasn't treated like a dangerous superstar, he was treated like someone who had completely lost direction. Inmates who once looked up to him now watched him struggle to even talk without getting upset. He isolated himself, avoiding people, skipping meals, rarely sleeping. The guards noticed he was quieter, slower, and less stable. The old Tyson would get into fights because he couldn't control his temper. This Tyson stayed in his cell, talking to himself, pacing, trying to understand how his life kept repeating the same painful cycle. Inside prison, he opened up to a few people and said he felt trapped not only by the bars but by his own mind. He admitted he had been dealing with anger and trauma since he was a kid, but no one ever taught him how to manage it. Fighting was the only thing he knew. Every punch he threw in the ring came from something deeper: childhood abuse, fear, loneliness, betrayal. When he stopped fighting professionally, all those emotions came back, and he didn't know what to do with them. Being locked up again forced him to face himself. He said he felt like a prisoner long before police arrested him. He had been a prisoner of his own mind for years. The media, of course, sensationalized everything. Reporters claimed he was completely unstable. Others said he was dangerous and needed help. Some said he was simply unpredictable. Fans argued online, some defending him, some saying they were done with him forever. But the truth was much more complicated. Tyson wasn't a monster. He was a human being who had lived through trauma most people could never imagine. Fame didn't protect him. Money didn't heal him. Every mistake he ever made haunted him, and prison only made his inner pain louder. During his time behind bars, Tyson talked about how embarrassed he was. He said he couldn't believe he let himself fall apart again. His biggest regret wasn't being arrested, it was breaking the trust of the people who still believed he could change. He said he felt like he disappointed everyone, especially himself. Some nights, guards found him sitting quietly on his bed, staring at the wall, thinking about how his life ended up like this again. The strongest man in the world suddenly looked fragile. What made this situation even more tragic was that Tyson had worked hard to rebuild his life before the outburst. He had become a calmer, more reflective person. He started meditation, therapy, and tried to stay away from the chaos that had destroyed him before. Fans admired the new Tyson, the wise, thoughtful one who spoke about discipline and peace. But deep down, his old demons never fully disappeared. They waited for moments of weakness, and when stress or anger hit, they came back with full force. People close to him said he was struggling mentally long before the outburst happened. He wasn't sleeping well. He wasn't eating regularly. He had nightmares. He felt anxious in crowded places. He would sometimes get overwhelmed for no reason. These signs were ignored until it was too late. When he finally spiraled, it looked sudden to the world, but to the people around him, it was something that had been building for months. Inside prison, Tyson tried to stay calm, but the environment made his anxiety even worse. Loud noises scared him. Confrontations triggered him. Isolation made him overthink every mistake he ever made. Instead of helping him recover, the system pushed him deeper into his suffering. He didn't need punishment, he needed psychological support, understanding, and healing. But prison doesn't offer that. It only hardens people who are already hurting. Tyson blamed himself. He said he should have walked away that day. He should have controlled his emotions. He should have remembered he wasn't the young, explosive fighter anymore. But trauma doesn't listen to logic. Pain doesn't disappear just because someone wants to be better. He realized he needed more help than he ever admitted. At one point, he opened up to a counselor in the facility and said he felt cursed. He felt like no matter how much he tried to change, his past always pulled him back. He described his childhood, the violence, the loss, the chaos of fame, and how he never had a chance to grow up normally. He said he felt like the world judged him based on his worst moments but ignored the battles he fought silently every day. He didn't ask for pity, he asked for understanding. And yet, despite everything, Tyson still had moments of clarity. He encouraged younger inmates to make better choices. He warned them that fame, money, and success don't protect you from your own mind. He told them not to let anger control their lives. These talks surprised everyone. Even in the middle of his own collapse, he still wanted others to avoid the mistakes he made. But his future now felt uncertain. His legal team worked hard to get him released, arguing that he acted out of emotional distress, not criminal intent. Fans hoped he would get another chance. Critics said he was beyond saving. Tyson himself didn't know what to think. He said he just wanted peace, something he had chased his entire life but never truly found. While he waited for updates on his case, time moved slowly. Every day felt the same. He thought about his family, his past, and the life he could have had if he had learned how to control his emotions earlier. He admitted he felt lonely, even though millions of people around the world knew his name. Fame doesn't protect anyone from emptiness. When news eventually reached the public about his condition inside prison, fans reacted with shock. Many didn't know the full story. They thought Tyson was still the unstoppable champion, the man who could knock out anyone in seconds. But the real Tyson was tired, broken, and carrying years of emotional damage. The world had never seen him this vulnerable. As days passed, he slowly began to reflect on what he wanted from life. He promised himself that if he ever got out, he would take his mental health seriously. He would focus on healing. He would avoid people who triggered his anger. He would rebuild his life again, even if it meant starting from zero. He realized he didn't need fame or applause, he needed peace, forgiveness, and a chance to finally breathe without the weight of his past crushing him. Whether or not the world forgives him, Tyson knows he must forgive himself first. His journey has been full of pain, triumph, regret, and hope. And even behind bars, he still believes he can become a better man. The tragedy isn't that he ended up in prison again, the tragedy is that no one ever taught him how to heal before everything spiraled out of control. But this time, he wants to break the cycle. This time, he wants to walk out of prison not as the broken fighter the world sees, but as someone who finally understands that strength isn't about punching hardest, it's about surviving what life throws at you and choosing to change anyway. Santana's music had become something electric, a sound charged with spirit and rhythm that felt bigger than anything he had touched before. His solos danced over congas, blending blues with the soul of musicians like Gabor Szabo and Tito Puente. The album that carried this energy, Abraxas, took its name from a mystical word in Hermann Hesse's novel Damien. It wasn't just a record people listened to, it became a piece of history. In 2015, Abraxas was added to the National Recording Registry, sealing Santana's place as not just a successful artist but a historic one. Still, behind the glory, cracks were beginning to show. While recording Santana 3 between February and June of 1971, cocaine started creeping into the sessions. What once felt tight and focused began to look like chaos. Rehearsals crumbled, people arrived late, and the creative spark that had defined the band dimmed. Michael Shreve called it a shutdown of creativity. Santana tried to fight it. He wanted the heaviest users cut off and warned he wouldn't tour otherwise, but the damage was already spreading. Things reached a breaking point on stage in Japan. In the middle of a performance, Carlos began hallucinating demons. Panic took over. He smashed his guitar and walked off stage. It wasn't just a bad show. It was the moment he realized something inside him was reaching a breaking point. Around this turbulent time, a 16-year-old prodigy named Neil Schon joined the band. He was young but fierce, fearless in the way he played. He'd trade solos with Carlos on tracks like No One to Depend On, pushing the sound into new places. But their fire started clashing. Schon had ambition. He challenged Carlos, questioned decisions, and arguments exploded during rehearsals. One day, the tension snapped and Carlos punched him. Schon walked out. The music remained powerful, but the peace within the group kept falling apart. Still, their rivalry shaped the records they made and left a mark on guitarists for generations. In 1972, the band began their Japan tour, playing to stadiums filled with up to 50,000 fans. They traveled on a custom Lockheed Electra called the Flying Turtle, carrying 12 tons of gear, but behind the scenes, Carlos' life felt shaky. Rumors in the U.S. tabloids claimed he was having affairs with Japanese groupies. His wife Deborah saw everything. They went into counseling, but the gossip didn't stop. Santana was becoming a global icon, but also the target of endless stories, pressure, and temptations he struggled to control. That same year, the album Caravanserai marked a dramatic shift in his music. The wild, party energy that had made them famous was gone. Now the sound was softer, introspective, spiritual, filled with jazz influences and long stretches of instrumental meditation. Only 3 songs even had vocals. Fans were confused. Many drifted away. Greg Rowley and Neil Schon left after the sessions, unable to connect with Carlos' new direction. behind that shift was something deeper happening inside him. Santana had started therapy. For the first time in his life, he spoke aloud about being abused as a child in Tijuana, memories he had buried so deeply that the silence had become part of him. This pain shaped his fears, his doubts, and the way he trusted people. In 1972, Carlos met John McLaughlin, a guitarist deeply involved in Eastern spirituality. Through him, Santana was introduced to the Indian spiritual teacher Sri Chinmoy. By March 1973, Santana didn't just admire the guru, he surrendered himself to him completely. He took on a new name, Devadip, a Sanskrit word meaning the lamp, light, and eye of God. This wasn't a publicity stunt. Santana gave up drugs, alcohol, and many of the pleasures that came with fame. Meditation replaced indulgence. Music became a form of prayer. Albums like Caravanserai and Illuminations reflected this shift. They explored jazz, classical influences, and stillness rather than the explosive rhythms that had made him famous. But the discipline came with heavy restrictions. Chinmoy disliked the noise, sensuality, and ego of rock music. Slowly, the tension between Santana's spiritual devotion and his creative fire began pulling him apart. His faith turned into something darker and more controlling. In 1973, he donated $150,000 to Chinmoy's ashram, more than $1 million today. Friends were shocked. He urged his band to remain celibate and even forbade public displays of affection, though privately, he didn't follow the same rules. The contradictions caught up with him. In 1982, Chinmoy sent Carlos a cold, vicious letter calling him an ignorant sea drowner and cutting him off completely. The guru ordered followers to avoid him. Carlos later said the silence that followed felt like losing a family. But it also forced him to reclaim his voice. During this time, he continued trying to build a life at home. He had married Deborah King in 1974, the daughter of blues guitarist Saunders King, and their first child, Salvador, was born the next year. For a while, the marriage gave him balance, but fame and pressure kept pulling him in other directions. 2 years later, Deborah found a stack of hotel love letters he had written to other women. They were detailed and intimate, painful to read. In her memoir, she described the heartbreak of loving a man who was always somewhere else, on the road, in his mind, or lost in guilt. Santana admitted everything. He said he hadn't been in his right mind, blaming the spiritual pressure, the constant touring, and the confusion of trying to live by other people's rules. They stayed together, but the crack in the marriage never fully closed. While all this was happening, Santana and John McLaughlin released Love, Devotion, Surrender in 1973. The album was soaked in spiritual longing. It reached number 12 on the charts, though many listeners didn't understand it. His concerts became unusual. Between songs, he read poetry and guided meditations. What once felt electric began to feel distant. Even Bill Graham, the promoter who had believed in Santana since the early Fillmore days, noticed audiences drifting away. Attendance dropped sharply. Fans didn't know how to connect with the new direction. Musicians inside the band grew frustrated. The forced spirituality drained the joy out of playing. Santana's later albums shifted into softer jazz and soul tones, but the blazing energy of the early years seemed lost. By 1978, the weight of everything nearly destroyed him. His faith had broken. His marriage was barely holding together. His career felt directionless. Depression consumed him, and one night, he attempted to take his life with pills. Deborah found him in time and saved him. But beneath even that despair, something older was eating at him. When he was 10 years old, the man who had promised to help smuggle Carlos across the border began abusing him. The abuse continued for 2 years. He buried the memories so deeply that they shaped him without him knowing how. It distorted his sense of worth, his understanding of love, and the way he trusted anyone. It took decades before he could speak about it. When he finally did, he said forgiveness had been the only way to free himself from the shame, and that surviving was its own kind of prayer. By 1981, his world tilted again. His album Zebop came out that April. The single winning brought attention, but the success didn't stay. The album only reached number 25 on the Billboard 200, far below his earlier impact. Columbia Records dropped him by the end of the year, ending a partnership that once felt like forever. To rebuild, he returned to the blues with Shango in 1982. But the pressure and disappointment drove him back to cocaine. The relapse damaged his vocal cords, forced him to cancel tours, and left him recovering for months. The early 80s became the hardest stretch of his life. The sound that had once poured out of him so easily now felt unreachable. In therapy, he finally revealed the truth about what he endured as a child. From age 10 to 12, he had been sexually abused by an American man in Tijuana, someone who pretended to help his family cross the border but used kindness as a weapon. Santana said carrying that secret for decades felt like dragging a chain he couldn't break. By 1982 and 1983, the silence overtook him. He attempted to end his life 7 times. Once, he jumped from a bridge and somehow survived. He later said those years felt like being locked in a room with no door. When he began speaking openly, others felt brave enough to share their own stories. Through it all, he tried to hold his family together. His daughter Stella was born in 1979, but even her arrival couldn't stop the cracks forming at home. By 1984, newspapers were printing stories about his affair with a backup singer named Becky Johnson. Deborah stayed with him for years, but the wounds ran deep. She later wrote about feeling invisible while trying to hold the family together. His music struggled too. In 1985, the album Beyond Appearances was supposed to bring him back, but it led to more conflict. Producer Ron Frangipane wanted a polished pop sound. Carlos wanted fire and soul. The album only reached number 67 on the charts. In the studio, the tension snapped. Santana smashed equipment and stormed out, convinced the music had lost its soul. People who were there said it looked like he was trying to break through the walls that boxed him in. After leaving Sri Chinmoy, he wandered through another kind of darkness, looking for something to believe in. By 1987, he turned to Kabbalah, hoping its teachings would bring clarity. While recording the album Freedom, he lit candles, practiced rituals, and meditated late into the night. He said those sessions helped him face his pain without trying to escape it anymore. For the first time, he felt forgiveness beginning to reach him. But the world wasn't ready to bring him back yet. His 1992 album Milagros sold fewer than 50,000 copies worldwide and barely made it to number 102 on the Billboard charts. His song Bella with Vernon Reid never reached radio stations, buried under the grunge movement that ruled the early 90s. In 1994, while touring Europe, he suffered a mild heart attack. It was another reminder of how much he had carried and how long he had been running from his own pain. Doctors said that years of cocaine and alcohol abuse had left Santana's heart scarred. He described the sensation as if an elephant were sitting on his chest. The attack stopped his life for 6 months, forcing him into rehab. He later said it was his wife Cindy who had dragged him to the hospital, probably saving his life. For the first time, the reality of his fragile body made him slow down and consider how he had been destroying himself for decades. In 1995, Santana tried to return with Dance of the Rainbow Serpent, a 3-CD box set filled with rare tracks and Woodstock outtakes. Critics praised it, but MTV refused to air his videos, saying his image was too ethnic. The set, released on August 7, 1995, included 35 tracks and rich photographs, but despite the artistic effort, it failed to chart. He had the talent and history, but the world had moved on, leaving him behind. By 1996, even his marriage was under strain. Deborah filed for divorce, citing years of infidelity, including an affair with a European promoter in 1993. The separation was devastating. Santana acknowledged his mistakes, writing an apology in the liner notes of his 1998 album Brothers. "I failed Deborah and our family, and I am truly sorry." They eventually reconciled, but the scars of the past lingered. The tension from personal life spilled into music. In 1998, he began working on a new record with producer Matt Soletic, trying to create something bold and vibrant. Lauryn Hill was supposed to join the sessions after her success with The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, but she never showed up. Studio costs mounted past $500,000, almost ruining him financially. Yet from that chaos came Supernatural, released on June 15, 1999. It became a worldwide phenomenon. The album featured 14 collaborations and changed everything for Santana. Smooth, featuring Rob Thomas, ruled the Billboard Hot 100 for 12 straight weeks. Supernatural sold over 30 million copies globally, including 11.8 million in the United States alone. This was his biggest triumph, coming 28 years after his previous #1 success. Even with the success, tension and disputes followed. Eric Clapton argued with him over the solo credits for The Calling, and Lauryn Hill sued over uncredited vocals onto Zion, settling for $5 million in 2001. None of it stopped the momentum. On February 23, 2000, Santana made history at the Grammys, winning 9 awards in a single night, tying Michael Jackson's 1984 record. He dedicated his speech to survivors of abuse, speaking softly but powerfully to a global audience. That same year, Maria Maria became a massive hit, holding the #1 spot for 10 weeks and selling 1.3 million copies in the US. Its mix of Latin rock and hip-hop turned it into an anthem, though some criticized the video for gang imagery and whispers of ghostwriting on the lyrics. Years later, DJ Khaled would sample it for Wild Thoughts, proving the song's enduring influence. In 2002, he released Shaman, another successful album. The single The Game of Love, featuring Michelle Branch, climbed to #5 on the charts and won a Grammy. Success, however, brought new challenges. During the 2003 tour, he fired longtime drummer Chester Thompson, saying he lacked energy. Fans interpreted it as another sign that fame had begun to erode relationships within his band. He divorced Deborah in 2007 and married drummer Cindy Blackman in 2010. Their connection brought new life to his music, culminating in Corazon in 2014, which debuted at #2 on the Latin albums chart. Yet even with love and music intertwined, conflicts persisted. In Chicago in 2012, Carlos walked off stage mid-song, clashing with performance and pride. Every show, every album, every relationship seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime of highs and lows. In July 2022, at age 75, he collapsed on stage in Las Vegas due to heat exhaustion and dehydration. 10 shows were canceled. He later admitted it felt like his spirit had been drained. Therapy, rest, and reflection followed. In early 2025, a broken finger delayed his residency, and he collapsed again during a sound check in San Antonio. A positive COVID-19 test added to the worry, leaving fans fearful. At 78, Santana said he felt at a spiritual crossroads but refused to quit. Later that year, another dark chapter emerged. He accused his former manager, Christian Garvin, of stealing over $1.6 million from him between 2008 and 2013. The lawsuit revealed 58 felony counts and a $260,000 bail. The missing money included tour profits and spiritual donations meant for charity. Santana said the betrayal felt like a knife in the back, as he had trusted the man completely. It was another painful reminder that fame attracts both devotion and deceit. From the bridge he survived in 1983 to the stage he fell on in 2022, Carlos Santana's life swung between pain and redemption. Every collapse, every scandal, every lost moment of trust became part of the man he was. And yet, through every hardship, he always returned to music, using his guitar as a source of healing and a voice for his emotions. Every string he strummed carried the story of a life survived, a journey from darkness into light. Even in his darkest moments, the lessons of the past never left him. His early struggles, the abuse he endured as a child, the years of substance abuse, the collapses, and the broken relationships, all of it shaped the music that inspired millions. Santana often said that forgiveness had been the only way to survive the shame and guilt he carried for decades. He learned that survival itself was a prayer, and every note he played reflected that belief. The highs of success and the lows of betrayal became inseparable threads in the tapestry of his life. Through the years, Santana's relationships were both his anchor and his burden. His marriages, divorces, and affairs reflected a man constantly torn between the demands of his art and the needs of his heart. With Deborah, he experienced deep love and devastating betrayal. With Cindy Blackman, he found creative and personal harmony, even if occasional clashes reminded him that life never loses its tension. Music, love, and pride were always entangled, guiding his choices and testing his limits. Even as his body aged, his spirit remained committed to the stage. Collapses, heart issues, and the exhaustion of decades-long tours reminded him that he was mortal, but each recovery reinforced his resilience. When Santana fell in Las Vegas in 2022, when he broke a finger and collapsed in 2025, he refused to see it as the end. Instead, he approached it as a moment of reflection, a pause before the next chapter. His life taught him that setbacks, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, were opportunities to find clarity and to reconnect with the music that had always saved him. The legal battles, particularly the case against his former manager, reinforced a hard truth about trust. The man who stole millions had once been a close confidant. The betrayal cut deeply, but Santana viewed it as another test of his perseverance. Fame, he realized, brings attention, wealth, and admiration, but it also brings danger, deceit, and heartbreak. Every victory, every setback, every note of the guitar became a testament to survival, reminding him and the world that he had lived through more than most could imagine. Carlos Santana's journey is one of extremes. From the abuse he endured as a child to the electric highs of Woodstock, the spiritual awakenings with Sri Chinmoy, the depths of depression and suicide attempts, and the ultimate triumph of supernatural, his life has never been ordinary. Each collapse, scandal, or legal battle didn't define him, it refined him. His resilience, his willingness to confront pain, and his dedication to music allowed him to find light in darkness. At 78, Santana stands as a living testament to endurance, talent, and the power of transformation. The guitar that once became his voice as a young boy in Tijuana remains the instrument through which he expresses every ounce of emotion, pain, and joy. From the first chord to the latest note, Santana's life is stitched together by music, by survival, and by the understanding that even in the deepest valleys, redemption is always possible. Each stage, each album, and each collaboration reflects the journey of a man who refused to let trauma, betrayal, or the passage of time silence his spirit. From the earliest struggles with family, abuse, and poverty to global superstardom, legal betrayal, and the challenges of aging, Santana's life is an epic story of transformation. He has learned to navigate fame with wisdom, to confront his personal demons, and to continue sharing his music despite physical, emotional, and spiritual setbacks. Every note he plays today carries decades of lived experience, a testament to endurance, forgiveness, and the transformative power of art. Through all the setbacks, Carlos Santana has never lost the core of who he is, a musician, a survivor, and a man whose life continues to inspire millions across the globe.